Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Alex Sapiachin and welcome to Black Vegan Speak. So I have some amazing guests today. My name is Alex. First of all, I'm the host and I'll be moderating the conversation. I'm a certified life coach as well as healer, and I focus on diversity conferences as a diversity advocate. I've done over 4 different conferences. The first ever diversity talk at Google, as well as SF Fest and Sacramento Veg Fest. So today we have some amazing speakers. We're going to start off with Erica Breed. She is a product designer in Atlanta. Her mission is to change the Black narrative in health and wellness and technology. The next person we have is Melody Martinez. She is a racial justice organizer, organizational consultant, and fundraiser based in Portland. Last of all, we have Michelle Rojas Soto. She is managing director in Encompass. Michelle has nearly 15 years of leadership experience in nonprofit and social enterprise work. Her work is focused on interconnectedness of issues, and she's committed to fighting prejudice, hate, and apathy on all fronts. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And I'm so honored to be part of this powerful talk on these amazing people of color. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, Michelle, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, I can't see you for some reason. Did your camera turn off?
I can see her.
Okay, sure. Okay, as long as everyone can
And
see
other
Michelle,
folks can.
okay.
Okay, great. Everyone else can see her.
Okay, awesome. So the first question I would like to ask, you guys can ask it in whatever order you like, is what drove you to become vegan? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Sure.
I'll break the ice. So, what drove me to become vegan was because I became more awareness. Not awareness, but I became more aware. I became more aware of my body. I became more aware of my spirit, and I became more aware of my spirituality. So that's kind of where my veganism comes from.
Yeah, I can go next. Well, for me, it was kind of a series of the age of 20 to about 28. I had a career as a veterinary technician. I was working with mostly animals, but mostly dogs, cats, small mammals every day, saving lives, extending care and compassion. But the inconsistencies of what I was doing and what I was passionate about at the time, which was animals, and what I ate, it started to dawn on me. I think it was maybe 2 years into being a veterinary technician, 2 or 3 years into being a veterinary technician, I started to really wonder, what is it about my job and what is it about my actions that don't feel right to me? I worked at the time with a vegetarian who also pointed out the inconsistency to me. It made it more clear for me. We were good friends, and so I started to explore not eating meat. But I didn't become vegetarian, and I didn't become vegan. That didn't happen until kind of soon after. I had just been broken up with. So this is a breakup story. This is a really weird vegan story. You're gonna enjoy it, I'm sure. So it was just the inconsistencies of working with animals. Yeah, inconsistencies of working with animals, and then I had just been broken up with. And that was a really painful experience. It was emotionally just really painful. There was a lot of suffering in the breakup. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't wish this kind of pain on anyone. I don't wish any kind of pain on anyone. So I actually remember exactly where I was. I started to reflect on the ways in which I am the cause of others' suffering. And I started to question, how can I stop causing suffering to others? Where am I responsible for suffering? And at the time I was being petty. I was like, my partner, he's the one who made me suffer. How do I cause suffering to others? And veganism was the first thing that came to mind. It felt like an immediate thing that I had the power to change. And it wasn't a new concept to me. It was, I had friends in high school, many of whom were vegan. And when I was growing up, I was like, that's great for you, but I could never be vegan. That's not part of my culture. And it wasn't until kind of this breakup, I was already exploring it, right? But it was this breakup that really made me think of where am I responsible for oppression? Where am I responsible for suffering? What privileges do I have on this earth that I could start to reconcile with? And that was it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's great to hear also like these personal stories, because a lot of times we talk about veganism only in activism. So that personal level is really awesome. So thank you for that. All right, Michelle?
I became vegan overnight 8.5 years ago. And it was a health decision. I had watched Forks Over Knife on a Sunday evening. And I remember I had just gone to Trader Joe's to do the weekly shopping and had stocked the refrigerator with all the yogurt and all the cheddar cheese in the world. And I watched Forks Over Knives and I was like, oh gosh, well, I need to say goodbye to the cheese. I'm going to eat it all. And then I'm not going to buy it ever again. And I did it. And it was like that. My husband and I watched it together and we looked at each other as like, well, this is really something. We have to make a big change for our family. And we didn't know how to talk about it. We didn't know how to tell our extended family that we had gone over to the crazy side. So for a while I said, like, we're just making some changes. And like, what changes are you making? It's like, I don't know. It's some kind of a transition, but I'm not eating any of the food that you just made. So it was really challenging. I found my voice eventually. I think I'm still finding it in some ways. And then over time, after getting comfortable with the eating habits, that's when I started getting curious about the ethical implications of the decision and doing research on it. And maybe, a year and a half or 2 years later is when it became that sort of that identity piece of being connected to my ethics and to what Melody was alluding to, the connection to animal suffering and environmental impact and so on. So even when I get, tempted by the Doritos, then that pulls me on this side because it's not about the cheese anymore.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I love that story because I'm not gonna lie too. I think cheese was my greatest issue. So I love that we have vegan cheese alternatives and they're so good, but cheese is definitely a hard thing to give up. So I'm glad you were honest about that too. That's amazing. So the second question I have is, how can we incorporate more justice work for people of color in vegan businesses, especially in major vegan companies? Who would like to go first?
I can start.
Okay.
There's a lot of power that organizations hold. There's a lot of power people hold, and when people come together to form an organization, in this case a business, there's that collective power. I'm encouraged by all the interest I am seeing as of late in, the question is, what can I do? There's a lot that we can do at various levels. An individual employee can learn how to become a bystander. And if you witness something unjust or unfair, speak up. Especially if you're not being directly affected by it, you have that luxury of not being affected, and you can help the person who is being affected. Learn about the interpersonal dynamics that play out as microaggressions, and what can we do in those meetings to support people of the global majority when they bring up ideas that may not be heard. Give credit to people's ideas. Oh, that was Erica's idea that you just restated. Give credit where credit is due. For people who have more power in organizations, say at the manager or director level where you can institute policies, take a look at how your policies might be unfair or unequitable for employees, potential partners. What does your supplier line look like? and so on. So I want to encourage people to look beyond their external communications, and I want them to do a lot of internal culture work as the starting point.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would add to that, kind of in the realm of the organizational, the institutional, inside these companies or these organizations. There's a lot of nonprofit vegan organizations, animal rights organizations, as well as, for-profit companies. And I think one thing that we need to note is that diversity and inclusion won't solve injustice. A lot of people think that hiring Black and brown folks into their companies or into their nonprofits is the solution. Like, oh boy, we've solved racism. We have staff of color here. But it's like, it's deeper than that. It's looking at what level do those staff of color, are they in? Are they, coordinators, associates, rather than directors? What does the leadership look like? What does the board look like? What do donors look like? All this does when we try to focus on the hiring piece, the kind of cosmetic piece of this issue, is it really brings those people, Black and brown people, into a racially negligent or a racially violent environment. And that speaks to a little bit of what Michelle said around the microaggressions and the interpersonal dynamics. So it's like the institutional, the organizational forms of racism really, they add fuel to those interpersonal ways in which racism can exist and injustice can exist inside organizations. So there's a lot of work to be done, like Michelle said, around acknowledging and rooting out the ways the company or the organization already perpetuates these organizational and institutional forms of racism. And that could mean like looking at your budget. Where are you spending if it's hard to root these things out on your own, right? If you're an owner of a company. And I also think it's important to hire people of color in leadership, and not just those who already have leadership experience or who may have gotten it. I don't know if sometimes my computer can cut in and out, but it's more than just hiring people of color. Again, it's putting people of color in leadership and not just those who've gotten access to leadership experience or who are coming in with that experience already because of access to formal education, because of favoritism or nepotism or other privileges that our society advantages, like the lightness of my skin color versus a darker skinned woman's skin color, a darker Black woman's color, thinness, straight or cisgender identity, the ways in which our society privileges folks who end up being in leadership at the expense of folks that don't have those identities and don't get that access to leadership. I think leadership can be encouraged in anyone, right? And I think it's important to encourage leadership from people who are traditionally kept away from it or not granted it, who may not have that experience, because otherwise, how else will we get it, right? So it's important to mentor and to promote and to set people of color up for success and to set them up to lead, to be successors to these companies, to be successors to these organizations. This kind of mantra of like, let us lead and let's see what level we can take this to. And also with businesses, forming worker cooperatives is a really great format of extending ownership, extending wealth and power and decision-making to Black and brown people in your business.
I love that. Thank you so much, Melody. How about you, Erica? How do you feel?
Both of these ladies' comments were really great. So, but one thing I've experienced is not only do, like these ladies said, that we need diversity and inclusion, but we need to hear Black voices. We need to hear voices of women. We cannot make decisions for a group of people based off of our assumptions, because we'll never get it right? Mm-hmm. So just like I say, I'm a product designer, so I do usability testing and designing products. I can't just design a product for an audience that I know nothing about. And I think a lot of times we do get caught up in knowing the answer for someone and not going to the source. So it's important that we just don't lead by our assumptions. So one thing that I think we don't do a good job is we don't have the Black individuals in these companies or organizations. So we have no one to speak for them. And then we don't have them as chief or leaders. so you don't have anyone to make diverse decisions. And you don't include people in your group or organization, then you're going to set your organization and your audience up for failure. And we have to somehow stop that routine, because those are behaviors that we teach our organizations and our businesses to follow. So it's like on a repeated cycle. And if we don't change the cycle, by allowing those of different cultures and backgrounds to be a head or a voice or a we'll never see those changes. And so we just have to acknowledge that.
Thank you so much, Erica. Beautiful points, women. So next we're going to talk about, actually I'm combining these two because I want to make sure we're reading the right timestamps. But the first one I want to ask is, what is the importance of being aware of our own privilege when it comes to supporting people of color, as well as what are some powerful things we can do to show proper allyship for people of color? Who would like to go first?
I can go. I feel I'll answer the first question first, which is the importance of being aware of our own privilege when it comes to supporting people of color. I think this is critical. You know, if you can't see the world beyond your own experience, if you can't see color, if you're not seeing entirely, you're not acknowledging all the pain and all the wrongs that are right in front of you. It's kind of the same way that we, as vegans, we ask non-vegans to like acknowledge who is on their plates, acknowledge who they're wearing, right? But whenever we're confronted with someone pointing out our privilege, I think we need to move from this space of defensiveness and guilt or shame and recognize that what's being given to us is a gift. They're making clear to us that which we can't see, right? And so feedback is a gift allowing you to become a better person. So I always ask and advise folks in my consulting, like, what if this were true? Ask yourself, what if this were true? What would it say about me if this person is saying this thing about me? What would it say about me? What would it mean about my ability to see the fullness of the world, right? And so I believe it's important in acknowledging privilege and being aware, not being more than just aware of privilege, acknowledging it and doing something with it, right? So listening to what you're being told, especially if it's by a Black or brown person, believing what you hear and then acting on it, right? Not wasting time in that guilt and that shame, because that really doesn't serve us, and it doesn't serve anyone, but it certainly doesn't serve people of color who can't do anything with that guilt and shame and can't convert that shame or that guilt into power for real change. So I think we need to look at the ways in which, our intentions aren't as salient as the impact of something that we've said has had or something that you've said has had. So it's important to center that impact if you've messed up, and it's really important based on what that person has requested of you. I always like to tell people the work is in the echo chamber. So talk to other vegans about racism and anti-Blackness in the world and in the movement. Like, wiggle where you stand. Be powerful where you stand. So yeah, I feel like I have other things to say about the second question, but I want to stop there because I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you, beautiful point. Who would like to go next?
I can add some thoughts.
Sure.
With regards to what we can do individually. This is related to the second question you had asked us earlier, Alex, about how we can incorporate justice in our organizations. And I see it all as a continuum of activities. I don't see them starting and stopping with particular boundaries. So I'll mention a couple of things. For people who have organizational power, something that you can do that's extremely powerful is to sponsor a person of the global majority professionally. So that we're often familiar with the term mentor, which includes offering someone support and advice. A sponsor can do those things, and they also say to the hiring manager, I think you should look at Melody. She has really great skills and would be an excellent fit for this position. Or Melody, let me connect you to this other person I know at this other organization, because I think that would be a really great fit for what you're trying to accomplish. So I would like to see people take more initiative in making those connections. A lot of uh, a lot of the ways in which we operate in the professional world have to do with relationships. And if you don't already have relationships, it's very hard to get relationships. So for these people with institutional power who have those relationships, do share them and bring people along with you. And then the last thing I'll say about this question is with regards to the awareness. Choosing it, I find it very hard to believe that someone in late June 2020 still can claim a lack of awareness. And so when we do awaken to that awareness, it's important not to look away. It's important to face it head on and engage and be comfortable with that discomfort, be comfortable with the mistakes that you are sure to make. But don't go back to pretending like you don't know. That's a disservice to yourself, to the people around you, and to the people who are yet to be here.
Thank you. So I know we talked about understanding our privilege, which is really important. It's something that I try to practice myself as well as an Asian man. How do you feel understanding your privilege can help the workplace in terms of understanding people of color better?
So I'll answer this one.
Sure.
First of all, like, I just want to say privilege can be really dangerous, but privilege can be really helpful. Because let's just be honest, privilege is dangerous to a certain extent, depending on how you use it. But you also can use those powers in a different way, especially in a workplace where if you talk about diversity and inclusion, make sure you're being diverse and you're included in that diversity and inclusion. I recently spoke up at my job, a startup tech company in Atlanta, and I had known about Juneteenth for about just 5 years, so brand new to it. And everything that's happened with the movement right now, my CEO actually reached out to all of us people of color, which is not that many of us, it's like 4. And he asked, what can we do to make it better? So at the time, I had no idea what to do to make it better, but I had to think about it. So he allowed me some time to think about it, and I asked if we could make Juneteenth a national holiday within our company. It didn't happen right away. It went over everyone's head. No one really understood it. They had me speaking from the entire company. And even then, it was like days later, I got people trickling in like, hey, I didn't understand this. Thank you for opening my eye. And then my CEO finally made it a national holiday. First, I think that it was because he gave us an option to take the Friday off and didn't demand it. And I don't think anyone really took the Friday off. So then he had to demand that this Friday be celebrated for the 402 years of slavery of Black people in America. So that type of privilege, even though you recognize a situation like what's going on, you have to also make actions. You have to support it if you believe in it. There should have been more people taking off Friday before it had to become a national holiday. So that's a problem that I feel like where it gets a little dangerous, because here it comes with the allyship. A lot of times our voices as Black women, especially, or Black people in general, are not heard. So we need other people to speak up for us in spaces where it's not so many of us, because then that way other people will listen to what people that looks or have commonalities with them can help support our cause. So your privilege is really valuable in just having a word and speaking up for causes of people who don't look like you. especially people of color that are women. And I mean, that's pretty much it. Like, you have to, if you're gonna speak about it, you have to be about it. And that's like an old saying that I was taught a long time ago. And that's something that I live by. And if we're gonna see change, we have to start acting on it.
So taking action towards asking these important questions. And that's amazing bravery. Thank you so much.
Can I add a little bit to that too, Alex, on this question of like the importance of allyship and how to show support? I'm a fundraiser, so I think that like money is important and how money moves is very important. So in addition, I love everything that Erica said around amplify our voices. I think the one thing I would add to that in addition is that when they are subject to dismissal or racist or classist critique, which they often are, whether it's in the online space or whether it's at work, right? As Erica was speaking, I was like, oh, I know exactly what that's what that's like. And then it's just like, and when those ideas are shot down, I think it is also the work of white allies or non-Black allies to defend our voices. So don't just amplify our voices, defend our voices, and make racism uncomfortable and unacceptable, especially at work, so that you're helping create a safer environment for the Black people in the organization, for brown people in the organization. And then I think like on the fundraising side, divest and invest, right? It's a strategy used in social justice movements. We call it divest invest, which means it comes from the kind of fossil fuel, environmental justice realm of like divest from fossil fuels, invest in green energy. And I think I see this in a way of divest from organizations and institutions that harm people of color or don't include us. Invest in organizations that protect, include, and are led by Black and brown people, and particularly in the vegan movement, where we know that Black and brown organizations are not being supported equally in the way that a lot of white-led institutions have been. So I think that's the single most effective thing that we can all do is acknowledge the racial wealth gap, acknowledge that we live in capitalism, acknowledge that your money matters and how your money moves matters, and demanding accountabilities from the organizations that you support, asking them, why aren't there more Black people? Why aren't there more brown people in your organization or company? Why aren't they in leadership? I'd like to know more before I make a donation. Really, like your money talks, everyone's money talks. And so I think really is more than just amplification and defense of our voices. It's like taking that action to make sure that our organizations, our ideas, our companies are around for the long haul.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ladies. Also, I just want you guys to be aware that we have organizations such as COAV, Community United Against Violence, that will support your questions and write to your jobs and bosses. So don't feel fearful if you're feeling like it's a scary situation. Okay, it's important to ask these questions. All right, the next one we have is, can you talk about the interconnectedness of Black Lives Matter movement in veganism, animal rights, and other social justice organizations? So what is our interconnectedness between all these organizations?
I'd like to offer my thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you.
There is no connection between different movements. Mm-hmm. What there is one movement, and some people focus on one, some people focus on the other, some people focus on more than one thing at a time. But there is no separation. If you see them as separate, I believe it's because you don't yet see, your privilege prevents you from seeing the connections. And there really is, the connections between systems of oppression are very, very strong. They all function by the same principles. And trying to dismantle one in animal protection without caring about racial oppression, the minute you take your foot off the pedal on animals, it will regenerate. So our work really has to be on dismantling oppression where we see it. And with that lens, it is everywhere. We see it everywhere. We have to work on it everywhere. I see the connections between what we're trying to do to be really strong. To me, they're like super highways going in both directions. And the idea that we can address these in silos feels so outdated. And I think it should have stayed back in the 20th century if we could. Here we are, a fifth of the way through this century, still using that same strategy, and I think it's not serving us. No human challenge is going to be solved, addressed individually.
Thank you so much for that powerful statement. Would anyone else like to talk about this question?
I sure would.
All right.
So I don't think you can have a strong opinion about one and not have a strong opinion about another. If you care about animal rights, then you should most definitely care about human rights. There's no separating the two. And like she said, it has to be a movement all together. You have to see where you can make change and where you stand and make a difference. There's no downplaying it. With the Black Lives Movement, there's no downplaying one life over another. It's just to bring awareness to a life that seems to not have as much empathy as other lives. So I think the movement of Black lives is not to exclude or separate from another. It's just to bring awareness to a particular group that over time and over years and centuries that has been put on the back burner and been misinformed and miseducated for so long. Now that we're seeing it in front of our faces in 2020, now it's time to bring awareness to this life along with other lives.
Thank you so much, Erica.
I love so much what is really, really powerful. I think the only thing that I'll add, because I feel like that those statements are so important, and the only thing I feel like I'll add, which I think about a lot in organizing, is that these movements, yes, are connected on multiple fronts, and it's important to know our history. It's important to know how animalization, for example, has been used to stoke fear of Black people in particular, and that fear of Black people also translates to fear of immigrants, to fear of the unknown or the other, right? Other people of color. And that animalization has been used to create tropes like that of the over-sexualized Black woman, or to suggest, for example, that Black people are inherently better runners or athletes. These are ways to say that we're closer to animals, that we're more like animals. And that animalization it's used in a negative way, not in a way a vegan would say, like being compared to an animal is a great thing. Animals are great. This is a negative association with animalization, and it's used specifically and intentionally by a racist society to justify murdering us, starving us, testing vaccines on us, caging us in prisons. Those are all things that are happening right now. They're not in the past. So as they're part of our history, they're also part of our present. And I think that kind of animalization that exists, like it actually it hurts our animal rights movement. It hurts the vegan movement. There's a Korean scholar by the name of Scott Nakagawa. He used to live here in Portland, and he has this saying that he says, anti-Blackness is the fulcrum on which all oppression exists. And it's what he says is it's basically no different than what Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's Black and coined the term intersectionality, has said, or what others before her, like Audre Lorde or Fannie Lou Hamer, have also said. But what it means is that anti-Blackness is this thing that plays this central role in any activity or event. So when we look at animality and we look at anti-Blackness together, we see how they're connected and how they're being used specifically against animals and against Black people. And I think that we need to, a society that does the work to assert and defend the humanity of Black people can begin to dismantle the oppression that other beings face. I don't think it'll happen any other way around or the other way around. Because, and I think we can work on ending both of these oppressions simultaneously. But I think it's already been shown by our own movement that we can care about animals, but that doesn't translate to care for Black people. And so we've got to really grapple with the fact that like nobody is free until everybody is free, to quote again Fannie Lou Hamer, love her. But really to think about what that means about our activism and where we focus our energy and time, and if it really makes sense to pour all of our energy into animals when it's so important that we assert the humanity and dignity and lives of Black people and all people of the global South, right, who are being who are experiencing extraction and oppression. So I think I think knowing our history and knowing how words are used, particularly around animals, it really shows us kind of what Michelle said, is that this has never been a single issue movement. It's always been there. And the fight for liberation isn't a single issue one. It's not just for yours or mine or an animal's, it's for all of us.
Thank you so much for your points. The next question is, what is something you feel the animal rights and vegan movements could be doing more of to support Black Lives Matter? Who would like to go first?
I'll share some thoughts.
Sure.
I think this is related to the question earlier of what we could be doing at organizations. And some of those things apply to animal protection groups as well. To keep it in the moment with the public outcries over the recent murders by police and people demonstrating in the streets, which have prompted groups to try to use social media to engage with Black Lives Matter. I want to let groups know that that doesn't quite hit the mark. If a group has not supported Black Lives Matter when there were no eyes on you, to say that you stand for Black Lives Matter is false. The words "you stand for Black Lives Matter" do not mean you stand for Black Lives Matter. The standing has to come, and then you can use the words to describe it. So I want to encourage groups to do introspective work, notice all the ways in which you are contributing to the status quo of racism. Melody started an introduction earlier talking about institutional racism, and organizations have a lot of power when it comes to that. So what are all the ways in which by ignoring racism, you're perpetuating racism? And start setting goals for yourselves as a group to address them. Realize that it is a lifelong journey, both for the individuals and for the life of a group, however long that group exists. There will always be work to do. Because we live in a racist society and we are well adapted to it, we're all here because we have adapted to this society. It is impossible to claim and be right in saying that I myself don't uphold racist values. If I have adapted to the society from the second I was born, and everyone around me has taught me those values, and the media supports it, and financial structure supports it, school supports it, banks support it. Everywhere I turn, those values are well entrenched. It is impossible for any one person to claim that they're above it and they somehow manage to avoid those values. So when we face that reality, it allows us to then act and really take meaningful steps to make change. I also want to encourage groups not to look for panaceas because there are none. And it is very disrespectful to Black people, that's what we're talking about, to think that there's something you can do. You have to be engaged. You cannot sign a change.org petition and consider yourself good for the month. I'm not saying don't sign the petition, but this is not about you feeling good about the
Yes.
petition. This is about whether or not the petition has an impact. And so really focus on whether or not you're making change. If you're not making change, keep working on making change. And then tell me that you crawled in support of Black Lives Matter or stood or walked in support of Black Lives Matter, figuratively speaking.
I love that you mentioned that. Change is a continuing journey, and we shouldn't see the situation as a trend, which some people do. So I love that you're calling that out. Would anyone else like to speak?
Of course. To add to that, I just have to say, like I said before, is including people that you're making change for, because you have to have their voices in order to be effective in the change that you're making for them. If you are petitioning or have an opinion, you need to make sure that you have the opinion of the people that you are trying to petition or make this change for. And I continue to say that because I stress it so much. Because a lot of times, a lot of what we see out here is in the media, you see a lot of things that portray what is the status quo for Black people or how Black people act, even to the movie industry. When you're writing a script or you're coming up with a Black agenda or a TV show or a movie, you have to understand that you need the Black people to be involved in your context, just like you need Black people to be involved in your organizations when you're making decisions. Also, make what you're fighting for, make it inclusive for everyone. Make it a second priority to include Black people, especially now. It affects your audience because everyone has a diverse audience right now. Black people depend on other people for businesses, for a lot of organizations. We do a lot of out of our community sourcing and buying. So it's really critical that we see ourselves in a positive light and not not a negative light. And like you said, it's not a trend. And you have to make action, like we've been saying over and over again. Because if you don't do the work and you just post, you're just going to fall into those same normalities as you were before. So that's all I have to say.
We had an important question actually in a chat box right now. And Vita says, what if the organization I work for doesn't support people of color? What do they do then?
Stand up. Make your voice be heard. If you feel like that's an issue at your company, then you need to address it to your hiring manager or the manager above that. Or if you're a smaller company, you can go straight to your CEO. You can do it in person, by email. Make sure you have evidence or facts behind it to why you're doing it, and to why you want to see this change. What would it help, and what is it not helping?
Yeah, I would add to that, take risks, be willing to take risks, and be willing to organize, right? Like, not just, you don't have to go alone. You never have to go alone on this. You can talk to your coworkers, who's on your side, who can you win to your side, how can you go together, right? How many people can you say, wow, there's 10 of us in this organization, I was able to organize 7 of us to move this forward and say, we are requesting Juneteenth off. We're requesting that you hire more people of color. We're willing to move out of the way for you to do that. all of those things, I think you can always go together. And what I would say for something about how I feel about like the animal rights movement or vegan movements, what they could do more of to support the Black Lives Matter movement specifically. Again, I'm coming here with my fundraising hat on. Fund Black movements, like fund Black organizations, fund Black work, fund Black people. Invest in Black people, not just in leadership in your organizations. Don't just amplify the voices. Exposure is fabulous, but I can't eat with exposure, right? Mm-hmm. So fund Black people, invest in Black people, amplify and defend Black voices, and be willing to be uncomfortable, be willing to lose friends, be willing to, I'll dare say it, even lose a job if you have to. Know your level of risk and what you're willing to do. That goes for a protest as well. Always go knowing what are you willing to do, what makes you uncomfortable, where can you push yourself more if you have more of a benefit, more privilege. But really, don't just read. A lot of people are reading, they're starting book clubs. Act, right? And ask Black people, ask Black and brown people in your organization or in your realm, what do you want? What do you need from us? How can I support you? Will this idea I have support you? I think that, we can always look to the Black leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement and say, ask, what can I do not just what can I do and kind of leave it there, but how can I support you? And one tangible way is to fund us. Fund and invest in Black people and Black organizations and Black movements. And like Michelle said, don't just check the boxes. This isn't I did my homework, I got it all done. It's an iteration. You got to keep going. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that.
Points.
I agree with both of your points. And the question from the person in the audience really reminded me of an example from a friend in my book club. We were talking a couple of weeks ago. She's the only Black person on the team, and she was the only person arguing in support of racial equity in a board meeting with very high-powered directors and executives. And while she was speaking up, her colleagues, who were all white, would be texting her, "You are doing a great job. You said it beautifully. I really support what you just said." But none of them had the imagination or the courage to speak up in that meeting. And the impact of those decisions is that she was all alone. And so for the ultimate decision maker, whoever that was in that room, and there's always a decision maker in our room, it looked like of all 13 people, only one cared, and it was the Black woman in the room. And so we might do some quick statistics in our heads and say, this doesn't affect that many people. Only one of them complained. So if you are noticing that your organization does not support people of color or Black people specifically, and you are white, you can say it. And it helps the Black person who might be there not struggle. It is such a huge struggle to be the only person, the person of color who is tasked with being an expert on race and an expert on creating equitable environments. It is exhausting. So if you're a white person who already knows things are not fair and equitable, say something. Even if it doesn't come out polished and you stumble, just say, wait a minute, give me a second and try again until eventually you'll start to see the results of your work.
Thank you. I love that you all mentioned the importance of supporting Black organizations. And also, I want you to know, the person who asked the question, that you can actually ask for support from some of these organizations like Co-op, like the NAACP. Say what tell them what you're feeling, tell them what's going on, and they can possibly give you the right information or support you need to as well. So the next one we have is, are there things you've experienced or seen Sorry. Talk too fast, went to my throat. My bad. The water fixed it. All right. So, are there things you've experienced or seen in the animal rights movement that you find to be harmful for people of color?
Go ahead, Melody.
We're all smiling, so I I mean, I just
It's a Pandora's box.
It's
You opened that Pandora's box.
opened it, and I think that between the three of us, we'll cover some serious ground. So whatever I forgot, please feel free to throw it in. I think, you know, things I've experienced in the animal rights movement that have been harmful to people of color, and specifically to Black Lives Matter, and specifically to Black people in the movement. I would say I think the starting point that feels the most stark to me is some campaigns. You know, we tend to forget like the history of some really racist campaigns, particularly by some large nonprofit organizations that are like swimming in the billions of dollars, right? PETA is one example of that. You know, campaigns that again animalize Black people, right, in the negative, right? Animalize Black people with bigger bodies in the negative. They reinforce this binary between our movements. I think the ultimate goal of that is to say either you're vegan and you're not this, or you are this negative thing, right? This object, this negative object. And that to me feels like the starkest thing, where it's just like these campaigns can no longer exist. They are harming our movement as vegans, and they're harming our movement as Black people, and they're harming all people of color. They're harming humanity. That is not what we should be representing, right? And then there's tokenism, right? Michelle talked about this one Black woman on this organization, and I wonder if she was the token. I wonder if she was hired to diversify the organization, and there she is all alone, dealing with all these harms. So tokenism in hiring and in vegan organizations, in vegan organizations and companies, I've been that token. I've been the person like, please model for our website, please model for our magazine. They're not asking any of my other white colleagues for this. They're asking me for this. And there's this idea of like, if we put you on the magazine or we put you on the newsletter, we can raise money off of our diversity, right? And I can see it, I know it, because it's very familiar. And so I think that piece around tokenizing really needs to be addressed. And then, you know, another thing I would say is like, not crediting Black and brown people, not crediting our ideas, our labor. There's a lot of conversation around stealing and looting right now. And I would say there's stealing and looting happening in these companies and these organizations around the ideas of Black people, around the labor of Black people. And all of that is building wealth for non-Black people and for white folks. And in order to build, you know, credibility and wealth, a lot of organizations, rather than encouraging and supporting Black staff to move into leadership or to access the platforms where they can speak on these issues, or to support funding, again, for Black-led organizations or people of color-led organizations, we see a lot of this like using Black people in order to access money, it's like a cultural theft, in order to like access money and credibility, and then move that money and credibility to the white organization, as opposed to amplifying that person and letting them speak for the organization if they so choose to, or saying, you know what, we are acknowledging we're a white-led organization. And rather than trying to kind of appropriate a movement or Black vegan you know, work, or Black movements in general, not just the vegan ones, I think we need you to support and these organizations that are led by amazing Black thinkers. And you know, we're considering our board, and we're bringing in people on our board, not just one person, not just a token. We're bringing in, and not a panacea of all people of color, but saying like, we made a move to bring the rule of three, I say, bring 3 Black people on, bring 3 Latin American folks on, bring 3 Asian folks on, help us build power by bringing us in cohorts. And really like focus on amplifying and encouraging the leadership. And if that's not happening, then moving the money, like giving credit where credit is due, essentially.
Yeah. I love your point. I love that you called him out because I think we need that person like diversifying our network, making sure that we include people of diversity, especially people of color, in the workplace, but also give a welcoming space to them. Fighting injustice in the workplace is so important because there's definitely should be enough people of diversity to be like, oh, hell no. Like, well, why are you doing that? You know that's racist. Like, stop it. We don't have enough people of color working in these fields. So I'm glad you pinpointed it out. Do any of you guys have a talk on this? Like, have any statement on this?
You mean an additional
Yeah, additional information.
thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts or opinions.
Yeah, this is something that I'm going to share a thought that definitely applies to animal protection, but it's not exclusive to animal protection. When we think of our culture and our organizations, we think of a baseline. Here are some organizations, and here are some Black organizations or Latino organizations. And we don't realize that when we say organizations with no descriptor, we mean white organizations. So I would like us to all learn to put that descriptor in there, because we approach these racial descriptions as if it was colors in art class, where white is the absence of color, it's a clean slate, and people of color literally sprinkle color onto the palette. But that's not true. There is something called white culture, and it has some specific characteristics. And when our organizations, when our white organizations don't see themselves as white, to Melody's point, they produce campaigns that are tone deaf. And then the question usually is, how come with our campaigns we don't attract Black people? How come they don't, they're not interested in what we're doing? Well, that shows privilege to what we spoke at the very beginning. The question we need to be asking is, what is precluding me and the white organization from connecting to people of Black people, brown people, and so on? What are they doing that I need to be aware of? It's a very comfortable position to center ourselves as advocates in the work instead of centering the work itself.
I'd like to add to Alex.
Of course.
I also want to just say this on the opposite side, too, if I can just be really transparent. There's no force. There's no force for inclusion if it's your organization and you don't see fit for inclusion in your organization. Where the problem is if you don't have inclusion in your organization, like these two ladies said, and you use the media to get the audience, a diverse audience, and to get diverse dollars, then that's when it comes a problem. So what I'm saying is, if you have an organization, like I said, and you don't want inclusion, say you want an all Latino or an all white culture organization, that is totally fine too. Just make sure that that point is made in the beginning and that you don't use Black faces to organize or to petition for your organization. And I know one thing we said, like, donate and participate in, Black organizations, but it's a must that we participate and be consumers of Black businesses, because the Black dollars goes back into the Black communities. And where we're lacking in the Black community is our economic status. We don't have an economic status right now in the world like every other race does. So in order for us to build the economic status, and like Melody said earlier, money is basically power. And so if you're going to make an action, I say make your action as far as giving your money to Black businesses, so Black businesses can have money to build inside their community, so they can have money to educate their youth, so that they can have money in their communities to have Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or farmers markets if we're not doing the Whole Foods Trader Joe's thing. But in order for stores of healthier choices and healthier businesses can be in the inner city communities, because if we don't, then there's no tax dollars going there. There's no dollars going into that community. So they're not going to look to plan and build healthy things or a healthy market in that community. It's just going to be liquor stores. It's just going to be gas stations, Piggly Wigglies. It's going to be all the unhealthy things if we don't donate into those communities. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think I would add to that that there's like the economic piece is such a huge piece, and there's so much that folks can do to push even their legislators, push people in their local governments to invest in Black neighborhoods, invest in Black businesses, invest in Black ideas, because the ideas are there. They're there, and the courage to build it up is there, and the desire to build it up is there. So like it's more than just giving to Black people and buying from Black businesses, but like going way upstream and like demanding from your local governments that they invest budget money, like tax dollars, into Black neighborhoods and into Black businesses and into Black schools, all of that.
Thank you so much. So we're now going to move into questions, if you guys are ready. So we're going to go ahead, view some of the questions we have from the audience, because they have been telling you all that you've been all doing an amazing job. So let's go to the first question. Right now we have this issue, sorry. So I'm reading this as it said, this issue that a couple of speakers touched on about family and culture being centered on eating animals is one that is particularly silent to many of us. We have to hold onto traditions and family, and we also want to move the average toward no animal products in our system. How do we marry these things together in a way that will allow our families to come along?
I feel like, Michelle, you spoke about this in your intro, your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you can
Well,
answer that one as you like. Yeah.
I definitely cook for my family. I'm not the only one who cooks for my family, but I'll just speak about my own experience. I think for me, it has been helpful to let go of the pressure to keep things the same and to experiment around whatever feels good in the moment. I try not to get stuck on the particulars of what a recipe was supposed to look like, but more what a recipe represented, and that it brought us closer together, or that it required, it was 5 hours of work, and so that means you're working in the kitchen with someone else. That's what builds the memory, and that's what I try to do at home with my kids. I do cook some traditional recipes, and I experiment quite a bit and find, substitute ingredients that achieve similar results. I don't usually call them something necessarily, like if someone ate this dish for 30 years and they're eating mine, it's not going to be the same, even if I have used the original recipe. So I present you a dessert, and after you eat it, you might recognize some of the flavors, and then I can tell you what I was trying to do. But in general, it's going to taste good. I don't know about trying to duplicate the flavor profile 100%. I feel like when I hold on to that standard, I'm setting myself up for failure. And then the other thing that was important to me when I became vegan, nobody talked about this at the time, I've heard other people mention it since, but not very popular, is when I stopped eating meat and dairy, I really felt like I was missing something in the flavor profile of my foods. But in about 6 weeks or so, I really felt like my palate awakened to find flavor in the vegan foods. And I don't know if it was literally coating of my tongue that sort of, sloughed off. Uh, but there is so much flavor there that we can discover, especially if we're not holding on to, what was.
Yeah, we had a comment from someone saying, and dessert. Don't forget about dessert. Vegan desserts are pretty good, I guess. Yeah. So next question we have is, what can white people who are not in positions of power in the vegan community do to expand their influence of POC? I can repeat that one again if you guys want.
I think we touched on this a little bit. I think this idea of positions of power needs to be, really needs to be kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, like unpacked. Power is a lot of things. Power can be good, power can be bad. Power does not mean that you hold a position of power. I think we all inherently have power, right? When I speak about Black people, I speak about Black power, meaning that it's not necessarily that Black people hold CEO and all these high, positions in the land, but it's meaning there's an inherent power to who we are and what we can do. And I think white people who don't have power have the power of whiteness and the power of white culture. And there was a comment about culture that I'll address in a second too. But there's plenty that I think white people who don't have positions of power in their organization can do to expand the influence of people of color in the vegan community. And again, I think that's amplifying our voices. If you see someone post something on Facebook or Instagram that says that's critical of something that maybe a Black person or a brown person has said, critical of Breeze Harper, critical of Christian Sebastian's ideas, or any of this sort of stuff that's out there, looking into defending Black people, coming to our side, like Michelle was saying earlier, around the kind of boardroom where the one Black woman is speaking and everyone's texting or saying, you're doing so great, but no one's saying it out loud, right? So being influence is also about power of influence is how you behave in society, right? And again, there's the power of money. You don't have to be a rich person to give money. In fact, it's very well documented. The people who give the most are people who can relate the most to whatever struggle is going on, is someone is experiencing. And it's more than just, it's folks who say I know what it's like to be hungry, so I'm going to give to my local food pantry. I know what it's like to be without a home or with uncertainty about shelter, so I'm going to give to my local shelter, right? So I think that I know what animals go through. I know that there's pain and suffering in the world, and Black people are saying there's pain and suffering happening right now, so I'm going to give to Black organizations, right? So I think all of that is, there's a lot of power that white folks without positions of power can do. You can exercise the power of your privilege. You can exercise the power of your wallets. You can exercise the power of your ability to empathize, to be an empathetic human being, and to speak up and speak out. And someone mentioned a comment, because I mentioned it briefly, about white culture. Culture is more than just nationality. It's more than just the place where you were born. It's more than just the boundaries of a country. And boundaries are kind of made up. They move, they shift, right? What Michelle was speaking to when she said, Michelle, you can speak for yourself, but I'll speak a little bit on this around culture, is that whiteness is a culture. There are characteristics of whiteness. The implicit idea, for example, that white is right is a part of white culture. And that expands nationality, that expands ethnic identity, whether you're Polish or you're Italian or you're Spanish or you're a white American. The implicit idea that white is right is why we're even having this conversation. And that is a facet of white culture. The objectivity that can manifest in white culture, like that. It's actually really well documented that more Black and brown cultures rely more on the subjective than the objective. And so the objectivity, this idea that Michelle was saying, that white is natural, or like if you don't say we're a white organization, then like there's just this assumption that it's a white-led organization. So that objectivity, that neutrality, that white is natural, those are characteristics of white culture. And there's a very great tool, resource that white folks can use called white supremacy culture. It's an article by Kenneth Jones and Tema Okun. And maybe someone can link it in the chat, but it's a great kind of resource to really think about how white supremacy culture shows up in companies and in organizations. And if you want to do some work around that, you can start looking at, wow, how does this, characteristic of perfectionism or objectivity, or everything needs to be on time, or everything needs to be written down in order for it to be official. All of these things are characteristics of white supremacy culture and of white culture, despite that white people can come from lots and lots of places.
Yes, and I'd like to add to
Thank
that.
you so much.
I'd like to add to that, Alex, if I could. I also think,
Of course.
I also think that it's not just like what you do outside, but a lot of it has to do with what you do at home. You're more powerful at home with your family and how you teach your children. Because as we see, hate is being taught. That's not something you're born with. So I think it starts a lot with our youth. And if we can get the message and start changing in ourselves how we act, or the language that we use at home, and how we're getting involved in the current movement with our children, with our family, I think that important things that we can do to start changing the way that other people, or white people, or white children that's grown up in society look at Black people or other people of other races in this society. And that's where we really can make change.
Thank you so much, Erica. I just want to say, Melody, I really love one of the resonating points you had was about speaking up as ally. That's so important for us to do, especially for me as an Asian person. I see my community a lot of times, also like in the San Francisco area, a lot of times we don't want to rock that boat. So I see certain injustice happening, and I always try to speak up. But I realize that with my people, sometimes I look around like, oh no, he's rocking the boat right now. But it's important as allies to actually say these things and to show like, hey, we care, because if you see that I care, then you also know that it's okay to care as well. Which is a horrible thing that we focus on, like, oh, if that person's doing it, then I can do it as well. But it's something that we have to be ingrained within ourselves. That allyship is about speaking up. So thank you so much, Melody, for mentioning that. And thank you both to Michelle as well as Erica. I appreciate you. So next question we have is, right now, Erica and white person ask you for guidance on how they can make it better. Is that a step to the right direction? Or B, putting a burden on you to fix it?
You want to start, Erica?
I can. I have two views on this. My first view is you should learn as much as you can on your own, because it's not every Black person issue. You have certain Black people in the Black community that does not want to have this conversation, or who are numb to the issue, or they're comfortable where they are. So I think a lot of it is like self-educating yourself on the history of Black people, or just whatever you find that most interests you, that you don't know. Just start there. Whatever questions that you have, just start there. And we all have Google, but be mindful. So I encourage people to do their research with books or articles to follow that up. Also, get with like-minded people. If you want to learn more about the Black culture, I encourage you to find organizations that are diverse. I encourage you to find people on your social media networks, join Facebook groups, or Instagram pages, or anything, Twitter, things like that, that are supporting Black communities. Another thing too is like, yes, ask questions. If you find someone in your organization or place at work or in your family, because a lot of us, we have diverse families here in America. If not, hopefully you have a diverse culture, maybe at school or at church or wherever you find comfortable, or have a relationship with a Black person, and ask if you can open up that conversation, because I feel that you're going to get um, the right perspective, or a correct perspective, or an exact perspective of someone that comes from the culture. So I encourage to do both, but I definitely encourage to do your research first, and then get involved in the community to find people that does not look like you, to have those deep conversations.
I agree with what Erica said. And I'm looking at the question. I'm glad we have this feature where we can see it. The person who asked it put it, it's either option 1 or option 2. I argue that it is both simultaneously. I expect that the white person who's asking for help does want to improve. And I also expect that the person they ask will be taxed by the question. To Erica's point, some Black people, if this is the context that we're speaking about, might have more stamina for a question at a particular moment in time than others. And so to the Black people who get this question, I will say, slow it down. There isn't any requirement out there that you must help. You can decline the request and only engage if you feel you have the bandwidth to do so. To the white person who might be asking for help, again, I agree with what Erica has said. In addition to educating yourself, I would say do as much work as you can before asking for help, and show that you're bringing something to contribute, so that you are not in a position of receiving without giving back. What you can give back is everything we've talked about before, from sponsorship to melodies, focus on fundraising. Erica brought up patronizing Black businesses and self-education. Show what you are doing before asking for yet another resource. It is common for white people to ask for help to deflect from acting against racism. So I ask everyone to take a moment and be introspective. The white people in the audience, if you find yourself asking for help and that is the action in and of itself, that's not helpful. So make that a part of something bigger, and refer back to all the other ideas that we shared earlier.
Thank you. So let's go on. And by the way, this is a great spot to ask questions because we're answering them today. So you guys are all in the right place. So next question we have is, I'd love to hear about some names of Black vegan organizations we can follow and support, both financially and draw attention to.
Who wants to go? I can name a couple. There's the Afro Vegan Society. Brenda Sanders' organization is a really great one to support. She's doing amazing work in her local community. And there's also Hip Hop is Green is another. Vegan Hip Hop Movement is another. There's also individuals you can support. I know Breeze Harper has done amazing work in our movement, and that deserves to be supported. AFCO has also done really great work in our movement. Christian Sebastian, all these folks have Patreons. They have ways that you can specifically support them with investments so that they can continue doing their work. But yeah, it'd be great. Folks could put some of those in the chat. So Afro Vegan Society, Hip Hop is Green, Vegan Hip Hop Movement, and those particular speakers.
If you're looking for some of the folks Melody has mentioned, there was, I believe, a mistake. It's Christopher Sebastian.
Oh, sorry, I said Christopher.
If someone is trying to Google him, Chili's on Wheels was started by a Puerto Rican woman in New York. She has launched chapters across the country and abroad. Some of those chapters, including in the Bay Area, are led by Black people, Black women. So you can look at that. K.R. Vargas has an organization, Decolonizing Racism. It is a Latinx-focused organization. For some people, this will be new. For some people, this will not. There's something, there is such a thing as Afro-Latinx, and me included. And KR does a lot of work in that space. And I work for Encompass. I'm a Black woman. I'm a Latinx woman. We're a nonprofit organization. You can look at events that are organized, look at who's presenting, and start going down the list and do some research there to find out where the speakers work, and that could give you some ideas as well.
To add to that, come from some tech. You could use Yelp. Yelp now has a Black business and Black restaurant link now, so you can find Black restaurants and businesses in your area. You can also, since this is SF Tech, you can donate to or volunteer with Black Girls Who Code. Yes, we do code. Also, you have Buy Black, which is a tech company who is like Amazon, where you can go find and buy Black products online, and then everything Black, or I think it's Black Buy Black Everything. Is that what it is? And you can go there too, and then you can buy from Black-owned businesses as well.
Erica, remember the one we met at?
And
Afro.
that's in Oakland. That's Afro Vegans Oakland. Look, I'm in Atlanta now. I'm in Atlanta, and the COVID has stopped me from going to my meetup. So, but you can go to a Meetup and you can type in Black Vegan events, and it will list all the Black vegan events for you.
Yeah, me and Erica actually met at the Afro Vegan Meetup. It's here in Oakland, California. So definitely check that one out. And there's also Cali Vegans of Color on Facebook. So there's actually a whole entire Facebook group for people of color. So I was like, I met you there, so I remember that one.
I would also like to shout out Black farmers, Black agricultural workers. When you look into the history of land acquisition in this country, who has been granted land and who has not been granted land, or who has had their land taken away, particularly in the South, really looking into Black farmers, because there's not a lot of Black farmers, but we out here, and they're like supporting people who are growing vegetables, right? Who are doing the work of growing food for their communities is vital. It's not just vital for Black vegans. It's not just vital for veganism in general. It's vital for like the health and sustainability of our communities and our planets. So I don't have any particular organizations that I would, or farms that I would recommend off the top of my head. That I know we have two Black farms here in Portland that I support, and doing a Google search, looking at the National Black Farmers Association, supporting organizations and groups that are doing farming work and doing land-based work is really, really important, particularly in its connection to food and food systems. And that's something that you can look into specifically kind of like around, you can ask questions about, you can look at their websites. Do they have chickens? Do they have cows? Most of them don't. That's a huge financial responsibility that most people don't take on. But even, I would say, even if they do, really thinking about, why am I supporting this organization? Is it because it supports veganism, or is it because it supports a better future for all of us by supporting Black self-determination, Black agency, and Black communities in particular? So really looking at our food systems and supporting Black people doing amazing work in the food system.
That's amazing. Thank you for mentioning that. All these are amazing suggestions. Let's definitely have a list up, because all those organizations we want to support. And I love that you mentioned farmers too, because farmers are actually a decline in today's society. So supporting Black farmers is so important. So I love that. Thank you. We have 3 more questions to go, okay? We're gonna try to go through them all, because I know we're about a little bit over time, but don't worry about it, we got this. All right, so the next question we have is, what if the organization I work for doesn't want to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement publicly? They want diversity without offending their donor base. I was upset and called it out, but nothing came of it.
Well, I will say that I think nothing's come of it yet. Change sometimes takes a very long time, and you might not be in that organization long enough to see that change. What I have started to notice, because I have been an advocate in and out of the animal protection space for a very long time, is that seeds I planted 10 years ago, I'm starting to see sprout now. And I have to replant the seed over and over, and I have to mention it over and over. So saying something once, in all likelihood, will not lead to big transformational change. However, when you are in that moment of saying something and you don't feel heard, remember, they cannot unhear what they just heard. So let that sustain you in knowing that in a way that you don't yet anticipate, you are helping.
I think I would add to that too, on this question of funding. Like, you know, they want diversity without offending their donor base. In the fundraising world, in the more radical social justice fundraising worlds, we say it's time for new donors. So really looking at soliciting new donors, like addressing the issues in your organization that make it so that perhaps looking at who your donors are disaggregated by race, right? If you have no Black donors, if you have no donors of color, why? Why is that happening? Because there is money, we have money, right? Even if it's this kind of like, even if it's not comparable to the wealth of white folks, you know, globally, it's not to say that I give all the time. And I am not someone who comes from wealth, right? And so looking at your donor base, disaggregating that by race and saying, wow, look at our donors. They don't represent the whole of our community. They don't represent the whole of our movement. And I think that part of that is seeking out those new donors, making your organization speak to those particular donors if it doesn't already, and not in a performative way, like we put a statement out and give us money, but like actually changing the organization to support Black and brown people and making it so that Black and brown people naturally gravitate towards wanting to give to your organization. And I think the work of fundraisers and donor organizers is to educate donors. So if you have donors that would say, I don't agree with Black Lives Matter, and so I wouldn't give you money if you're gonna make this statement, it's actually the job of that organization to sit down with that donor and talk about, share this video with them, talk about the ways in which the Black Lives Matter movement and all movements for human justice, social justice, environmental justice connect to liberation for animals, connect to animal rights. So it's the job of fundraisers, it's a job of the people in those organizations to educate their donors who are resistant. And if those donors remain resistant, there are plenty of donors who would support you for doing the right thing.
And two, to add to that, I always say come with a backup, or come with a PowerPoint or information or a reason why, because a lot of times at those higher levels, they're thinking about other things. Like they're thinking about money, they're thinking about space, they're thinking about the future of their company. A lot of times they don't have the time, which is not an excuse, to think about things on a lower level, or diversity or inclusion, which should be a high priority, but it's not a priority. So you have to make them understand why it's important, why it's an investment, and what differences it'll make to have diversity and inclusion in their company.
Beautiful, thank you. I think we have three amazing, awesome points of view. We have you, Michelle, who talks about just standing up and making a statement, starting something. Where you see the result or not right away, it's still going to come. So taking action is so important. With you, Melody, you're talking about, again, be able to look at your agency, find out what are injustices that are happening right now, you can work on that you can fix. And I love that. Also donating back to businesses and organizations that do support people of color. I love that aspect. And with you, Erica, I love you talking about doing your research, right? Before you come to these places, a lot of times you're going to have all these situations that are going to work against you, right? So doing your research, making you be prepared for a situation is so awesome. So thank you all for these amazing, amazing comments, as well as suggestions. They're awesome. So the next one we have is for Melody. You are so right, girl. What about the white folks who do not agree that white is right? I've met tons of white people who disagree with this.
I've met tons of white people who disagree with it too. That doesn't make them not racist. I think you don't have to have a conscious belief that white is right. You don't have to be someone who espouses that kind of rhetoric, that kind of ideology. But implicitly, you could be acting in such a way that you are determining that demonstrates that you believe that white is right, or that white is better. That is indicative in communities, not just white communities, and indicative in communities of color as well. I remember growing up, to tell a quick story that illustrates the point. Erica was saying families can be mixed, right, in our current society. And in my family, my mom is Black. My father was a brown man, and like Michelle, I'm Afro-Latina, or like say Black Latina to be specific. And my aunt is a white Latina woman. And I remember gifts from my aunt as a child. They were always white dolls. I always got white dolls from my aunt, but I only got Black and brown dolls from my mom whenever I was given gifts. And I specifically, to my mom, I would say, I want a doll that looks like me. I want a doll that looks like me. Because it was evident when we went to the toy store that most of the dolls didn't look like me. And so even though my aunt, who also, by the way, has married a Black man and has Black children, does not espouse this idea that white is right or white is better, she would always buy me and her Black children white dolls. So that's more than just espousing the ideology. That's implicitly believing something, even if it's not something you would ever say out loud, even if it's not something you even notice. We are absorbed into a culture of white supremacy. We are absorbed into a culture that says that white is smarter, white is better, white is prettier, white is everything good in the world, right? I was telling a colleague today who's painting his house, and I said, you know what, when you go to the paint store, look at the names of all the paint colors. You will notice that it's like angel white, intelligent white, and then it gets to like the darker colors around brown and Black, and it's very clear that there's racism in that industry and in that company where colors are like donkey brown or plantation Black. Like, these things actually exist. There's nowhere where we can escape it, because our society is steeped in it. It's foundational, particularly to this country. So what I would say to someone who says, oh, you don't believe white is right, show me the hiring choices you made. You were a manager at an organization. I would like to see the hiring choices you've made. I'd like to see who you reached out to when you were trying to make those hiring choices. Did you reach out to Black potential applicants? Did you reach out to people of color potential applicants? Did you hire a Black or brown person in the position? You may not believe white is right, but somehow there's a bias in there that might have what might have made you choose a white person over a very qualified or equally qualified or overqualified Black woman or Black man. Right.
Would anyone else like to speak upon this?
I'd like to add to that. Melody, I'm so happy that you brought up the paint situation because I recently bought some paint. And I definitely saw that. But before I did, you know, it's systematic. And you can look at the definition of white versus the definition of Black in Webster. And you can clearly see those distinctions, how you mentioned about the paint colors. They're there too. White is angelic and Black is sinful. And so when we have those things included in our dictions of words, what does that look like to everybody else who's not from here, who doesn't speak a native English language? So when they come here and they see those terms and they see the definition of those terms, they are also being manipulated into white supremacy. And then to add to, I forget the second point that I wanted to make, but so I'm going to skip that. But I definitely, with the color thing, definitely is apparent.
Well, Erica, now that you bring up words, I'll share with you all my least favorite word in my life so far. And that is the word denigrate, which means to make, to make someone less than, but literally it means to make Black.
I've learned so much from you, amazing, powerful women. Again, beautiful on the inside out. Love it. The one thing that really resonated with me in terms of this conversation, in terms of what I've listened to, is again the statement of the privilege, understanding our own privilege. And I feel like that really resonates with this question too. Like, if we understand our own privilege, a lot of times we have that internal, this racist mind of thinking that we have that's imprinted within us, right? So then when we understand our privilege, we're able to understand how to kind of like battles those thoughts a lot. Because I meet, as a queer Asian man, sometimes I meet other queer Asian people, and we have this internalized racism that we have based on like this internal programming, and acknowledging our privilege helps me understand that more. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you so much. We go to the last question today, but both me as well as the audience is learning so much today, so I appreciate you all. And the last question we have is, any particular reason there are no Black male voices represented in this panel? We will continue to host events in the future that include greater diversity, okay?
I think it sounds like that's a question for the organizers. Looks like it was answered in there.
Mm-hmm. And I do encourage folks to ask that question when there's all male panels.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to say, I'm not an organizer within this panel, but I do want to say that you amazing women were the first ones to step up. So I'm saying females stepped up in the situation. So we were really searching for male candidates. But the thing is that the first people who were like, yes, we're going to talk, we're going to actually express our stories, our opinions, were all of you girls, all of you women, right? So that's something we want to include. But for the situation right now, the step up has been through these amazing, powerful women. But we do want to continue to progress and grow within this panel, because this is only our second time. Erica, you were on our last panel. So that was amazing, and you gave a wonderful speech. So we always want to integrate and improve. All right, you guys, so that's the end of the panel. Thank you so much for being here. We learned so much, and your opinions are greatly appreciated, and I love the wisdom. So definitely please make sure to support as well as to follow all these amazing ladies. What's the best way to follow you guys individually? Are you first, Michelle?
You mean on social media? Is that the question?
Yeah, social media, a website, whatever you choose for people to follow you on, definitely let us know.
Oh, all right. Well, folks can find out more about the work I do in animal protection at encompassmovement.org. And our social media is also at Encompass MVMT. We do a lot of work to support white-led groups who are trying to create racially equitable organizations. And simultaneously, we do work to support animal advocates of the global majority who are either working in those groups or trying to create a path, a career path for themselves in those groups. We provide professional help, resilience, support, and community building, which is so important for our groups. And that work is done around the world. We're offering support already to advocates in 17 countries.
All right, how about you, Melody?
I don't have any public social media. So I would just say really pushing folks to support Encompass because Michelle works there and is phenomenal, and pushing folks to really support, I think that so much of what I said tonight, I actually learned from other Black people, not just from my experience, but from other Black people, and particularly other amazing Black scholars and thinkers in this movement. Christopher Sebastian, Afko, Breeze Harper, Michelle, there's just Brenda Sanders. There's just so much great scholarship out there. I would encourage folks to follow that scholarship and continue to support that scholarship. Follow those accounts. You will learn a lot from doing that. And those are folks who have dedicated so much of their time and their life and their work life to doing this work. And I think that from my understanding, they are all incredibly intersectional in their understanding of veganism and animal rights and human rights. So much of the good stuff that's out there, it's out there and it's ready for you to support and follow. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melody. How about you, Erica?
I would like to say the same. I don't have any public social media that supports my vegan community. But if you are interested in product design, you can follow me on Instagram at Erica, ERICAB.REED. And this veganism is just a part of my second movement. But one of my first movements is to increase the numbers of Black women in particular and Black men too in the tech industry, because there's only 2% of us, which is less than one Black male on each tech team. And me coming through, there is less Black females in the design and tech industry. So that is one of my main focuses.
It's super important.
Yep. I would
Thank
say
you.
I am on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Hey, all right.
There's my one public profile. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I also do consulting and organizational consulting work on racial equity and racial justice. So feel free to reach out through LinkedIn. I will answer.
Look it up, you guys. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being part of this panel. We really appreciate your opinions as well as your wisdom to us to improve our allyship. We support you all, and thank you guys for all being part of this conversation. Have a good day, everyone, and talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.